Welcome to a 3-game match of Legacy, featuring Chris playing his no-color Mud Artifacts deck versus myself playing my GWr Enchantress deck. Chris wins the die roll and starts with an opening hand of Lightning Greaves, Ancient Tomb, Grim Monolith, Cavern of Souls, Kuldotha Forgemaster, Wasteland, and Spine of Ishsaw. I start with an opening hand of Enchantress's Presence, Forest, Solitary Confinement, Plains, Argothian Enchantress, Eternal Witness, and Replenish. Chris plays Ancient Tomb, taps it to produce 2 colorless mana and take 2 damage, and casts Lightning Greaves. He passes. I draw, play a Forest, and pass the turn. Chris plays Cavern, naming Construct, taps the Ancient Tomb again for 2 mana and 2 damage to cast Grim Monolith, and then taps the Monolith and the Cavern to cast Lodestone Golem, making my spells cost 1 more to cast. Chris equips the Golem with Greaves and attacks me for 5 damage. He passes. I play Plains and pass the turn. Chris untaps everything but Grim Monolith, draws, and plays Wasteland as his land for the turn. Chris casts Metal Worker, then equips Greaves to it, and then taps the Metal Worker, revealing Spine of Ishsaw and Kuldotha Forgemaster, to add 4 colorless mana to cast Forgemaster and equip Greaves to it. He then taps the Forgemaster, sacrificing Grim Monolith, Metal Worker, and Lodestone Golem to search up Blightsteel Colossus and put it onto the battlefield. He then equips the Colossus with the Lightning Greaves and attacks for lethal damage, winning Chris Game 1. Game 2, I choose to go first. I play Forest and cast Utopia Sprawl, targeting the Forest and naming green. I pass the turn. Chris draws, plays Darksteel Citadel, and passes. I untap, draw and cast Argothian Enchantress, and then play Taiga as my land and cast Utopia Sprawl, targeting my basic Forest, drawing a card and naming white. I pass the turn. Chris draws, plays City of Traders, and then casts Trinisphere. He passes. I untap and draw and play Savannah. I then tap out to cast Sigil of the Empty Throne and draw a card. I pass. Chris untaps, draws, and taps City of Traders for 2 mana, and then plays another Darksteel Citadel, sacrificing City of Traders. He then taps another 2 mana and accidentally plays Kuldotha Forgemaster, despite being 1 mana short. He passes the turn. I untap, draw and play Forest as my land for the turn. I then tap 3 mana and cast Argothian Enchantress. I then tap another 3 mana and cast Wild Growth, targeting my second basic Forest, drawing 2 cards and making a 4/4 Angel. I pass. Chris untaps, draws and activates Forgemaster, sacking all of the permanents and finding Mirror Battlesphere and putting it onto the battlefield, giving Chris 4 1/1 mirrors. I untap and draw and play Forest. I then attack Chris for 4 with my Flying Angel. I then cast Enchantress's Presence, drawing 2 cards and making an angel. I then cast Sterling Grove, making an angel and drawing 3 cards. And then cast Seal of Cleansing, drawing 3 cards and making an angel. I intended to use the seal to shoot Chris's Forgemaster, but Chris concedes before I had the chance. Next game. Chris plays first for game 3. He starts by playing Ancient Tomb. He taps it for 2 mana and 2 damage and casts Lightning Greaves. He passes. I draw and play Windswept Heath. I pass the turn. Chris untaps, draws and plays a second Ancient Tomb, and then taps the tomb to cast Grim Monolith. He then taps the Monolith and the other tomb for a total 5 mana and casts Kuldotha Forgemaster. He then equips the Forgemaster with Lightning Greaves and taps the Forgemaster to sack all 3 of his artifacts and search up Blightsteel Colossus and put it onto the battlefield. He passes the turn. I draw and play Plains. I then pay a life and sack my Windswept Heath and find another Plains and put it onto the battlefield. I then cast Runed Halo, naming Blightsteel Colossus. I pass the turn. Chris untaps and draws. He then taps both the Ancient Tombs once again, taking 4 damage and casts Trinisphere. He passes. I untap, draw, and play Windswept Heath. I pay life and sack it to find a Forest and put it onto the battlefield. I then cast Enchantress's Presence and pass the turn. Chris does the same exact thing again and passes the turn. I untap, draw, and play Savannah. I then tap 3 and cast Argothian Enchantress. I pass the turn. Chris untaps and draws. He then taps both tombs again, going to 2, and casts Metalworker. He passes. I untap, draw, and play another Savannah. I then pay 3 mana and cast Wild Growth on a Plains, drawing 2 cards. I then cast another Presence and draw another 2 cards. Chris untaps and draws, and without a land to play and no longer able to use his Ancient Tombs, Chris attacks me for 1 with the Metalworker. He passes. I untap and draw. I cast another 3 mana Wild Growth on another Plains and draw 3 cards, and then cast another Presence and draw another 3 cards. Missing a land drop, I discard down to 7 and pass the turn. Chris draws and plays Cavener Souls. He then taps the Metalworker for 4 colorless mana, revealing Koldatha Forgemaster and Wormcoil Engine. He then casts the Forgemaster and passes the turn. I draw and cast Moat, drawing 4 cards. I then play Serra's Sanctum and tap it to produce 7 manas and cast Solitary Confinement, drawing 4 cards and casting Sterling Grove, drawing another 4 cards, and then cast Sigil, drawing another 4 cards. I discard a bunch of cards and pass the turn. Chris untaps and draws. He thinks for a moment and then passes the turn. I untap and during my upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Confinement. I then pay a mana and sacrifice Sterling Grove to search up Words of War and put it on top of my library. I then draw the words and play Plateau as my land for the turn. I cast Words of War and draw 4 cards and make an angel. But in response to the words entering the battlefield, Chris taps the Koldatha Forgemaster, sacking it in 2 Trinispheres to search up Sunring Titan and put it onto the battlefield, blowing up a forest, a mountain, and a plains from me. But being at 2 life and having no way of stopping the words, I win the game. Chris and I also played 1 game of Modern, with Chris playing Kyle's Living End deck, and myself playing my American Midrange deck. I won the die roll and start with an opening hand of Restoration Angel, Think Twice, Cryptic Command, Tectonic Edge, Lightning Bolt, Hallowed Fountain, and Steam Vents. Chris mulligans and starts with an opening hand of Blackcleave Cliffs, Violent Outburst, Stomping Ground, Verdant Catacombs, Deadshot Minotaur, and Overgrown Tomb. I play Steam Vents tapped and pass the turn. Chris plays Verdant Catacombs and passes. I play Mystic Gate and pass the turn, but at the end of my turn, Chris sacks the Verdant Catacombs, paying 1 life, to search up Forest and put it onto the battlefield. He then cycles Deadshot Minotaur and draws a card. Chris untaps, draws and plays Blackcleave Cliffs. He passes, and at the end of his turn, I cycle Think Twice. I untap, draw, and lay down a tapped Hallowed Fountain, and am wary of Violent Outburst. Chris cycles Monstrous Caravid. Chris untaps, draws, and plays another Blackcleave Cliffs. He passes. I untap and draw. I play Tectonic Edge and pass the turn, and Chris mountain cycles Valley Ranit. Chris untaps and draws. He plays the mountain and then casts Avalanche Riders. I Cryptic Command the Riders, choosing to counter it and draw a card. Chris passes. I untap and draw. I play Scalding Tarn and pass the turn. Chris untaps and draws. He plays Overgrown Tomb tapped and passes the turn. In response, I sacrifice the Tarn and find Steam Vents and put it onto the battlefield untapped, taking a total of 3.0 damage. I then flash back Think Twice, and in response, Chris casts Violent Outburst. Chris cascades into Living End, oddly enough. I remand the Living End, putting it back into Chris's hand and drawing a card. Violent Outburst then resolves, and I draw a card from the Think Twice. I untap and draw. I play an untapped Sacred Foundry, not worrying about damage from the Living End deck. Chris untaps and draws. He plays a tapped Blackcleave Cliffs and then suspends Living End. He passes the turn, and at the end of the turn, I cast Vendilion Click, targeting Chris. I put Jun Charm on the bottom of Chris's library and let him draw a card. I then electrolyze Chris for 2 damage and draw a card. I untap and draw. I play a Celestial Colonnade and attack Chris for 3 with my fairy. I pass the turn, and Chris cycles. Chris untaps and removes a time counter from Living End. He plays Urborg to my Yawgmoth and then casts Avalanche Riders. I Mana Leak the Riders, and Chris does not pay the extra 3. He then evokes Shriekmaw, killing my click. He passes. I untap and draw, and then pass the turn. Chris untaps, remove a time counter, and draws. He plays Verdant Catacombs and casts Street Wraith, which resolves. He passes, and I cast my second click, targeting Chris. It resolves, and I look at Chris's hand and put Violent Outburst on the bottom of Chris's library. I then cast Restoration Angel, Blinking Vendilion Click one more time to see Chris's new hand and confirm that it was nothing but lands. I untap and draw. I attack Chris for 6 with my 2 flyers and pass the turn. Chris untaps and casts Living End. I cast Snapcaster Mage, targeting Cryptic Command. I then cast Cryptic Command, targeting Living End, choosing to counter it and draw a card. With nothing but lands in hand and no way to stop lethal damage next turn from flyers, Chris concedes.